40 years ago, October 20th at 6:30 is about the time that we went down.
What if one of rock's most iconic bands wasn't just lost to fate, but to a chain of warnings, choices, and chilling missteps? The story of Lynyrd Skynyrd's final flight has long haunted fans, but buried beneath the headlines is a detail so preventable it doesn't just raise eyebrows, it twists the knife. This isn't about legends crashing in a blaze of glory. It's about a decision made too late, and a quiet, overlooked factor that changed everything. Before the fire, before the headlines, there was a moment, one moment that could have rewritten music history. Was it ignored? Was it misunderstood? Or was it something no one dared to confront until it was far too late? Let's find out. A band on the brink of immortality. By the mid-1970s, Lynyrd Skynyrd had become a defining force in Southern rock, fusing gritty guitar riffs with country-inspired storytelling. Formed in Jacksonville, Florida, the band rose from humble beginnings and a rocky start, complete with multiple name changes and local setbacks, to become household names across America. Their core lineup of Ronnie Van Zant, Gary Rossington, Alan Collins, Leon Wilkeson, Billy Powell, and Artemis Pyle helped craft a unique, high-energy sound that resonated with a generation. Their early hits, including Gimme 3 Steps, Tuesday's Gone, and Simple Man, gained immediate traction and built a fan base that stretched beyond the South. With each album, the band's reach expanded, solidifying their place among rock legends. Free Bird, the band's most iconic track, became more than just a song. It was an anthem. Known for its emotionally raw lyrics and extended guitar solo, it often served as the closing piece of their concerts. Radio stations across the country received frequent requests for the song, and audiences would shout, "Play Free Bird," at live shows, a phenomenon that continues to this day. The track helped elevate Lynyrd Skynyrd into mainstream consciousness, proving they weren't just a regional act, they were shaping the future of rock music. Their aggressive touring schedule and no-frills image made them relatable, but their musicianship earned them critical respect, particularly in the live arena. The release of Street Survivors on October 17, 1977, only 3 days prior to the crash, should have marked a big step forward. It featured newer members like Steve Gaines, whose guitar work was lauded, and illustrated a band at the very zenith of its creative and technical prowess. The album shot to the top of the charts and included highlight tracks such as What's Your Name and That Smell, the latter allegedly inspired by Rossington's car wreck while inebriated. The initial album cover, with the band standing in front of an immense fire, would soon become disturbingly prophetic. The insiders and fans alike felt that the band was on the edge of being catapulted into another level of fame. Their concoction of raw storylines and red-hot stages was starting to find a new setting in rock. Yet backstage, the heat was intense. Would they have simply burnt too fast, too soon? That question would find a better, darker context just days later, with the crash that brought their short-lived glory to an abrupt close, turning the vanishing amount of rising legends into everlasting myths. Just as the band reached their peak, an overlooked decision was already steering them toward disaster. A Curse of the Convair 240. The Convair 240 that carried Lynyrd Skynyrd to their doom was already an aging aircraft long past its prime. Manufactured in 1948, the plane had accumulated over 29,000 hours of flight time by the time it was chartered for the band's tour in 1977. While this model was once a standard choice for short-haul commercial travel, it was largely retired by the late 1960s in favor of more modern and reliable jets. The specific aircraft Skynyrd rented was not well maintained and lacked the redundancy and safety systems expected even at that time. What raised additional concern was that this plane had a questionable operating history, and had changed hands multiple times, often being used in roles far removed from regulated passenger service. What makes the story more disturbing is that another high-profile rock band had already investigated and rejected this same aircraft just months before. Aerosmith's management team considered renting the Convair 240 for their 1977 tour, but backed out immediately after inspecting both the plane and its crew. According to reports, the pilots were seen drinking Jack Daniels during the evaluation, an enormous red flag. Aerosmith's team cited safety concerns and explicitly warned against using the aircraft. That decision, in hindsight, might have saved their lives. The fact that this incident was known in industry circles raises questions. Did Lynyrd Skynyrd's management ignore those warnings, or were they simply unaware of the plane's checkered reputation? Despite known concerns, the band decided to move forward with using the Convair 240 for their tour. Convenience played a major role. The aircraft allowed the band to avoid long hours on the road and meet a grueling tour schedule. For Ronnie Van Zant and others, canceling or rescheduling shows was not an option. They didn't want to let their southern fan base down. Even after visible signs of engine trouble during a flight from Lakeland to Greenville, concerns raised by crew and band members alike were dismissed. Cassie Gaines, who had already expressed fear of flying, reportedly considered riding in the band's equipment truck instead of boarding again. Yet, she and others were convinced to get back on the plane. The tragic irony lies in how close they were to abandoning the aircraft. Discussions were already underway about switching to a Learjet for the remainder of the tour. But that plan never materialized in time. Instead, the band boarded one final flight aboard a plane that had already shown signs it wasn't fit for the air. A decision that would cost 6 lives and alter rock history forever. Prophetic warnings and ominous words. One of the eeriest and most talked about aspects of the Lynyrd Skynyrd tragedy is the sense of foreboding that surrounded lead singer Ronnie Van Zant in the months leading up to the crash. Van Zant reportedly told multiple people, including his family, bandmates, and even journalists, that he believed he wouldn't live to see 30. His father recalled Ronnie saying, "Daddy, I'll never be 30 years old," a statement he repeated so often that it stopped sounding like drama and started to feel like conviction. Artemis Pyle also remembered a conversation in Tokyo where Ronnie told him, "I'm going out with my boots on." Tragically, his prediction would come true. Van Zant died in the plane crash at just 29 years old, less than 3 months before his milestone birthday. Cassie Gaines, one of the Honkettes and sister of guitarist Steve Gaines, also had a deep fear about flying on the Convair 240. Her fear wasn't vague anxiety, it was so intense that she preferred to ride with the band's equipment in a cramped truck rather than board the aircraft again. After witnessing sparks from the right engine on an earlier flight, she had every reason to be alarmed. Yet despite her resistance, she was persuaded to board the plane for the flight to Baton Rouge. The one who convinced her was none other than Van Zant, who famously reassured her with the chilling line, "If it's your time to go, it's your time to go." In retrospect, that moment has become symbolic of the fatalism that seemed to surround the band at that time. Such haunting statements didn't merely stand alone. Ronnie Van Zant made peace with dying young in other conversations too. His wife Judy would later admit that upon hearing about the crash, she already knew he wouldn't survive. "He told me so many times that I realized that he really knew what he was talking about," she said. There's no definitive explanation for why Van Zant felt so strongly about his fate. Was it intuition? Fatalism beaten into him with a hard-living lifestyle? Or just coincidence? Whatever the case, constant remarks about dying young make this already tragic event all the more haunting. In retrospect, such predictions are not easy to digest. A prediction of ominous signs backed by fears that were brushed aside earlier, along with the final words that seem almost scripted by fate, brings much discomfort. Did Van Zandt truly believe that his end was here, or merely do those moments seem more dramatic because of what followed? Either way, those remembrances, with all their public fame from Skynyrd lore, are triggered even more to lengthen the mystery and sorrow born of October 20th, 1977. Catastrophe in the making. When the Lynyrd Skynyrd Convair 240 went down on October 20th, 1977, initial reactions assumed a catastrophic mechanical failure. But the official investigation revealed something far more preventable and disturbing. According to the final report from the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, the crash was not caused by a structural failure or engine explosion. Instead, the plane simply ran out of fuel. This revelation stunned fans and experts alike. With 26 people on board, the pilots failed to accurately monitor fuel levels or detect the unusually high fuel consumption from the right engine, which had shown signs of malfunction days earlier. The tragedy wasn't the result of chance, it was a failure in planning and oversight. Investigators determined that the crew was flying with the engines set to an auto-rich mixture, a setting that consumes more fuel and is typically used only during takeoff or climb, not during cruise. The standard cruising procedure would have been to switch to the auto-leans setting, which conserves fuel. This oversight, combined with inadequate fuel management and the crew's failure to properly gauge the fuel supply, led directly to the disaster. Adding to the frustration, the pilots reportedly misjudged the amount of fuel they had remaining during flight, leaving them unprepared when the right engine failed first, followed shortly by the left. They attempted to reroute to a nearby airport in Mississippi, but the aircraft didn't have enough fuel left to make the emergency landing. One particularly disastrous moment came when the flight crew attempted to transfer fuel between tanks to stabilize the imbalance between engines. Instead, they accidentally jettisoned the remaining fuel into the atmosphere. In doing so, they eliminated any remaining chance of keeping the aircraft in the air. The plane's engines quit altogether, forcing the band and crew into a powerless descent over Mississippi swampland. For a group that had endured the chaotic grind of life on the road, their fate was sealed not by rock and roll excess, but by a preventable series of missteps inside the cockpit. This was not just an accident, it was an avoidable failure in basic aviation protocols. Making matters worse, the band had reportedly already discussed replacing the Convair 240 with a Learjet. After witnessing the earlier engine troubles, they knew the plane was unreliable. So why didn't they switch immediately? Was it a matter of cost, scheduling pressure, or misplaced trust in the crew's ability to manage? No definitive answers emerged, only the grim irony that their escape plan came one flight too late. The cause of the crash, as confirmed by investigators, was not a mystery. It was human error. The final moments on board. As the Convair 240 began its final descent on the evening of October 20, 1977, most of the 26 people on board remained unaware of the full scope of the danger. The first part of the flight from Greenville, South Carolina, had gone smoothly. Passengers were relaxed, some played cards, others rested. Ronnie Van Zandt, exhausted from performing the night before, was reportedly asleep on the floor with a pillow. There was no panic yet. But everything changed when drummer Artemis Pyle decided to visit the cockpit and was immediately told to return to his seat and fasten his seatbelt. The urgency in the pilot's voice marked the first clear sign that something was wrong. It didn't take long for that unease to spread. Once passengers were made aware that the plane had run out of fuel and both engines had failed, a chilling calm took over. Survivors later recalled that no one screamed or broke into chaos. Instead, most closed their eyes, clutched their seats, or held each other in silence. Billy Powell described it as a moment of collective prayer. These last 10 minutes were filled with dread and resignation as the plane dropped lower, the lights inside flickering. Some tried to brace themselves, while others simply hoped for a miracle. During the final descent of the aircraft into a thickly wooded area near the site of Gillsburg, Mississippi, the first visit to treetops was coined as 1,000 baseball bats slamming against the fuselage. The plane tore through trees along 1,000 feet, coming apart piece by piece. Guitarist Gary Rossington would remember this sound later. It was deafening and violent. The cockpit came loose from the rest of the plane and crashed into a tree, slaying both pilots instantly. The wings were sheared off, and the tail section disintegrated. Those seated in the rear had a slightly better chance of surviving, but no one escaped without serious injury. The impact was not so gentle. The jungle swallowed most of the aircraft, churning it into a swampy, pine-covered clearing and leaving a trail of debris and injured bodies across the forest floor. Died in the crash were Van Zandt, Steve Gaines, Cassie Gaines, and several others, either during the moment of impact or shortly thereafter. Survivors like Powell, Rossington, and Pyle were hurled from the wreckage or pinned under debris. In seconds, this journey, meant to continue a triumphant tour, ended in catastrophic silence. The terror of those last moments remains one of the most haunting chapters in rock history, an abrupt and violent end to what had started as just another flight to the next gig. What happened next wasn't just survival. It was a descent into chaos few could have imagined. Horror on the ground. When the wreckage of Lynyrd Skynyrd's plane came to a violent stop in the swampy woods near Gillsburg, Mississippi, the survivors found themselves surrounded by devastation. The fuselage was torn apart. Debris and twisted metal were scattered across the forest floor. Those who had made it through the impact were dazed, many critically injured, and some were still trapped inside the remains of the aircraft. Keyboardist Billy Powell, who suffered severe facial injuries and a nearly torn-off nose, later described stumbling through the chaos, hearing groans and cries for help. One of the first voices he recognized was bassist Leon Wilkeson, who was pinned inside the wreckage shouting, "Get me out of here!" The crash site, though devoid of fire thanks to the absence of fuel, was still a scene of unimaginable horror. Drummer Artemis Pyle, with broken ribs, somehow managed to crawl free from the wreckage. Despite the intense pain, he began a desperate search for help, navigating through dense underbrush, swampy terrain, and near darkness. Powell later recalled how Pyle disappeared into the trees without hesitation, determined to find help for his bandmates. His condition was so severe that every movement risked further injury, but Pyle knew that no help would come unless someone got out and raised the alarm. Pyle finally managed to reach a rural farmhouse after wading through a creek and tearing through barbed wire fencing that punctured his skin. Then the event escalated into one that was worse than that. Homeowner Johnny Mote came to regard him as a threat, possibly an escapee from prison, and fired a warning shot. When he did not stop, Mote shot him in the shoulder. It wasn't until Pyle managed to gasp, "Plane crash," that Mote realized what had happened. The farmer immediately brought him indoors and called emergency services. This would be the very call that eventually flew red flags regarding the actual crash site. Meanwhile, the site of the crash was not pretty. Emergency responders spoke about tripping over bodies, not knowing if the next body was dead or alive. Some were thrown from the plane, while others were embedded in wreckage. It took hours to move injured survivors to local hospitals. Everyone was suffering from his physical and emotional trauma. In fact, the survivors did not really know who had survived or perished until much later, and not immediately following the event. In that first hour after the impact, there was no certainty other than pain, confusion, and the horrifying realization that their lives and music history had changed forever. Aftermath and national mourning news of the Lynyrd Skynyrd plane crash spread slowly at first. In the pre-internet era, fans across the country were largely unaware of what had taken place until CBS evening news anchor Walter Cronkite broke the story during the 8:20 p.m. broadcast on October 20, 1977. Even then, initial reports were vague and lacked a confirmed list of victims. Families of the band members waited anxiously for updates. The public did not yet know who had survived and who had perished. The names of the dead, including Ronnie Van Zant, Steve Gaines, and Cassie Gaines, would not be confirmed until the following day, deepening the shock and heartbreak. As the full scope of the tragedy emerged, a wave of national mourning followed. Fans, radio stations, and fellow musicians paid tribute to the fallen band members. Candlelight vigils were held, and tributes poured in from across the music world. Southern rock had lost some of its most vital voices in an instant. Lynyrd Skynyrd was more than just a band. They represented a raw, unapologetic voice for a generation, and their absence left a glaring hole in the American music landscape. Many fans felt the loss on a deeply personal level, as if they had lost someone they knew. For a band that built its image on being authentic and accessible, that connection proved tragically powerful. The disastrous premonition of a tragic fate brought forth Street Survivors, an album across the cubicles, onto the two-cell sheet. Stores had begun selling the album 3 days prior to the crash, and the songs now seemed to take on a strange life of their own. That Smell, a casual tune about recklessness in life, was suddenly reinterpreted through the consciousness of death and bereavement. The first album cover, showing the band before flames, namely plastered and taken off from the stores under public agitation, was substituted with what was considered a much tamer image. The album became a source of frenzy for customers who grabbed for it, landing it at number 5 on the Billboard 200 and eventually turning it double platinum. The tragic end of the band and the eerie, unexplained factors that surrounded its demise created a classic. Immortalization and legacy of the dead members are contrastingly woven with the anguish, bone-deep pain and guilt of the survivors in having continued on with life without their brothers. To this day, the tragedy is among the most haunting tales in rock history. Public outcry transcended the mere world of music. They were grieving lives snuffed out far too soon and pondering the question of whether this tragedy could and ought to have been avoided. Scars that never healed, the physical toll on the Lynyrd Skynyrd survivors was devastating. Guitarist Gary Rossington, one of the founding members, was critically injured in the crash, suffering 2 broken arms, a shattered leg, a punctured stomach and liver, and multiple broken ribs. He was the only original member to continue performing with the band in later years, but his body never fully healed. Rossington required numerous surgeries and lived in chronic pain for the rest of his life. He also developed heart problems in the decades following the crash, leading to multiple bypass surgeries. Though he remained dedicated to Skynyrd's music, the injuries haunted him until his passing in 2023, marking the end of the original lineup. The band's bassist, Leon Wilkeson, sustained life-threatening injuries. During the rescue efforts, he was declared dead thrice and had his crushed chest, facial injuries, and an entirely ruined arm, which nearly ended his ability to play bass. Although he experienced much trauma, he came back to perform with the reformed Lynyrd Skynyrd in the 1980s. In spite of this, his health continues to be troubled. He has experienced a number of heart attacks and has had to use braces specially made for his weak arm when performing. Wilkeson died in 2001 in a hotel room in Florida. The official cause of death ascribed to be chronic liver and lung disease, though some accounts speculated on the lingering after-effects of the crash related to his death. Alan Collins, who co-wrote much of the magic of the band's hits, would later have an accident that left massive spinal injuries, resulting in temporary paralysis of the right arm. He regained the ability to play his guitar many years later, but the injuries left indelible marks on them. Alan Collins was paralyzed from the waist down following a car accident in 1986. He'd never get to trapeze again. Collins had caused the accident, driving under the influence of alcohol and slaying his girlfriend in the wreck. Over the years, Collins battled substance abuse and depressed mood states. He died in 1990 from pneumonia complications worsened by his paralysis. Survivors have had more than just physical injuries. They bear in their minds traumas that haunt them for a lifetime. That night, the death of friends and public memories' weight made recovery more complicated than simple medical treatment or physical therapy. Again, efforts to continue making music came at an unforgivable price and reminded fans that the accident may not have taken all their lives, but it has affected forever every survivor it left behind. The scars were permanent, both seen and unseen. Controversy, legacy, and lawsuits. The legacy of Lynyrd Skynyrd has not been without controversy, particularly regarding who gets to tell the band's story. One major source of tension emerged in the 2010s when former drummer Artemis Pyle attempted to create a film based on his memories of the crash and its aftermath. Pyle, who was among the survivors and famously sought help after escaping the wreckage, began work on a biopic titled Street Survivors, the true story of the Lynyrd Skynyrd plane crash. However, the project quickly drew legal opposition. Ronnie Van Zant's widow, along with representatives of other estates and surviving members, filed a lawsuit to block the film, arguing it violated a decades-old consent agreement about how the band's story could be used commercially. The dispute centered around a 1988 agreement signed after the band's partial reformation, which stipulated that no individual member could exploit the group's name or history without the approval of others. Pyle argued that the film was a personal account of his survival, not a full band narrative. A district judge initially sided with the plaintiffs, halting production. However, the ruling was overturned on appeal in 2018, and the film was eventually released in 2020. While some praised its raw depiction of the crash, others criticized it for low production value and factual inconsistencies. The split reaction illustrated the delicate balance between individual memory and collective legacy, a theme that has long shadowed the band's post-crash history. Another one quite closely depicted burning dust-ups for the original Street Survivors album cover, showing the band standing in flames. The backlash at MCA Records raged for weeks from their fans and family, even blaming them for this blatant prophecy in unfortunate taste after the crash. The original artwork was replaced with a less provocative black background setting up the band image, but bootlegs of that original artwork still seemed to circulate, and the controversy played out again decades later. Fire hurts for some fans. For others, it holds in its midst part of the enigmatic tragedy of the band's rise and fall, being some part of its tragic lore. Such legal battles and public disputes question who, then, owns the story of Lynyrd Skynyrd: the surviving members or the families of the deceased, or possibly the fans who have managed to keep their music alive for decades. The legacy has become both a legal and emotional battleground, even as the music continues to tire the ear. For a band built on Southern pride and unity, the fight over its memory has hardly been harmonious. Even after decades and courtroom battles, one final chapter still remained to be written. A final goodbye. The death of Gary Rossington on March 5, 2023, marked the end of an era. As the last surviving founding member of Lynyrd Skynyrd, Rossington's passing closed a chapter that began decades earlier in Jacksonville, Florida. His resilience had become symbolic of the band's survival, having endured the 1977 plane crash, years of chronic health issues, and countless lineup changes. Despite multiple heart surgeries and serious injuries, he remained committed to Skynyrd's music, continuing to perform even as his health declined. With his death, Lynyrd Skynyrd no longer contained any original members, a fact that prompted reflection on the band's transformation from living entity to legacy act. Yet, even without its original lineup, the band's influence has endured. Lynyrd Skynyrd helped define Southern rock, a genre that blended blues, country, and hard rock with a distinct cultural identity. Songs like Free Bird and Sweet Home Alabama remain fixtures in American music, featured in films, commercials, and political rallies, sometimes controversially. Their unapologetically Southern image resonated with fans across generations, making them not just a band, but a cultural symbol. Countless artists across genres have cited Skynyrd as an influence, from Kid Rock to Metallica, proving that their reach extends far beyond their original heyday. Not only in sound, but also in the physical space. Some visible testimonies of an enduring presence of a band dexterously include for a holistic tribute to sites. A monument erected not far from the crash location in Gillsburg, Mississippi, celebrates the memory of the victims and the band's legacy. It has been kept by local residents and fans as a memorial site and pilgrimage for others who still remember the music. Over the years, fans have left guitars, letters, and Southern flags at the location, hand testaments to how personal the sounds remain among them. Other tributes include stage dedications, museum exhibits, and musical homages, most keeping alive in the collective memory of American rock history. Lynyrd Skynyrd's farewell tour at the beginning of Rossington's death can be said to be a final bow to decades of music, survivalism, and endurance. Some fans might still ask if Lynyrd Skynyrd should continue on as a band without at least some founding members, but the tour was far less about who remained than what was left. Sure, the music, often raw, defiant, and unmistakably Skynyrd, was the heart of the experience. The physical story of the band ceases with the death of Rossington. However, its musical legacy continues in memory and on vinyl. For millions, Lynyrd Skynyrd didn't just represent a band, it represented a way of life that refuses to fade. Thanks for watching. If this story hit you like it hit us, give it a like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into music's most haunting moments. And if you're ready for the next untold story, go ahead and click the video on your screen now.